The house stands abandoned, and always will, or so the legend goes. It is widely believed across the small town of Eben Ridge that in the late 1800s, an elderly couple, Agnes and Edmund, were seeking solace in their final years. After a lifetime of hard work and modest living, they wanted a peaceful retreat, far from the noise of the growing cities. When they came across a grand, decaying manor on the outskirts of a small village, it seemed like fate. 6 bedrooms, acres of untamed garden, a place rich in history, and at a price so low it was almost a gift. "There must be a reason it's so cheap," Edmund muttered, his brow furrowed. Agnes, ever the optimist, waved away his concern. "It's old, Edmund. We'll bring it back to life. It's exactly what we've been searching for." The house loomed before them, tall and imposing, its ivy-covered walls hiding secrets beneath peeling paint and cracked windows. Inside, the grandeur of a past life echoed in the vast halls, high ceilings, dark wooden floors, and chandeliers covered in dust. Though time had clearly taken its toll, the house held an eerie beauty, like a forgotten relic of another era. But something felt off. The air was heavy with silence, as if the house was holding its breath. There was one thing, however, that neither Agnes nor Edmund could overlook: the painting above the fireplace in the parlor. It was immense, far too large for the room, its golden frame tarnished with age. The painting itself was dark, almost suffocating. It depicted a dense, twisted forest, the branches of the trees curling unnaturally as though they were alive. In the center of the forest stood a single, charred wooden stake. The shadows between the trees seemed to shift when looked at too long, and the blackened stake seemed to radiate a cold, malevolent energy. It was as though the painting was hiding something, waiting to be discovered. "I don't like it," Agnes whispered, her voice low. "There's something wrong with it." Edmund nodded slowly, unable to tear his eyes from the sinister scene. "We'll take it down," he promised, though the words felt hollow. Something about the painting held him in place, as if it was daring them to remove it, but Agnes was determined. "When we move in, that's the first thing to go." 2 weeks later, the manor was theirs. The move-in day was dark and overcast, as if the house itself resented their presence. A storm loomed on the horizon, but Agnes and Edmund pressed on, eager to settle into their new home. The wind howled around them as they brought in their belongings, its wail blending with the creaking timbers of the ancient house. True to her word, Agnes's first act was to remove the painting. She fetched a ladder, hesitated only for a moment, and then pried the frame from the wall. The moment it left its place, a deep chill settled over the room, but Agnes tried to ignore it. Edmund appeared in the doorway. "Let's take it to the barn for now," he said, his voice tight. They carried the painting through the overgrown garden and into the crumbling barn, leaning it against the far wall. As soon as it was out of sight, the house felt lighter, less oppressive. They thought that was the end of it, but they were wrong. The storm hit that night, howling winds battering the old manor, rattling the windows and shaking the roof. The couple huddled in their room, listening to the relentless storm outside, but beneath the sound of the wind and rain, there was something else. Something faint, like the crackling of fire. Agnes sat up in bed, her heart racing. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Edmund, groggy from sleep, frowned. "It's just the storm." But Agnes wasn't convinced. She rose from the bed, pulling on her shawl, and crept down the hallway. As she reached the parlor, she stopped cold. The painting was back. It hung above the fireplace, just as it had before, the twisted forest and the charred stake looming in the darkened room. Agnes's breath caught in her throat. She turned and ran to the barn, desperate to confirm what she already knew. The painting was gone. It had returned to the house on its own. "This isn't possible," she whispered to herself, the wind whipping her hair as she stood in the doorway of the barn. "This can't be happening." Edmund found her there, shivering and pale. "What is it?" he asked, his voice hushed. She told him about the painting, how it had moved back inside on its own. They both stood in silence, the weight of the house pressing down on them. They returned to the parlor, but neither dared touch the painting again. That night, Agnes dreamt of the forest. In her dream, she stood among the twisted trees, the air thick with the smell of burning wood. At the center of the clearing was the stake, but it was no longer just blackened wood. A figure was tied to it. A woman, her skin charred and cracked, her eyes wide with terror. Flames licked at her feet, slowly climbing higher as she writhed in agony. The woman's screams were shrill, piercing the night air, but there was no one to save her. The trees seemed to laugh, their branches curling tighter, trapping her in the blaze. Agnes woke with a start, her heart hammering, but the nightmare didn't end when she opened her eyes. The smell of smoke lingered in the room, and at the foot of the bed stood the woman from her dream. Her body was scorched, her hair wild, and her eyes, those haunted, hollow eyes, locked onto Agnes. She couldn't move. She couldn't scream. The figure stood there for what felt like an eternity, her presence filling the room with the acrid stench of burning flesh. And then, as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone, leaving only a faint trail of smoke in her wake. The next morning, Agnes said nothing to Edmund, but the fear gnawed at her, a growing dread that clung to every corner of the house. That evening, they both heard it again, the faint crackling of fire. They stood in the parlor, staring at the painting in horror. The flames in the picture moved, flickering like real fire. The trees seemed to sway in the wind, their twisted limbs reaching for the sky. And then, at the center, the woman appeared again, her body bound to the stake, her face twisted in agony as the flames climbed higher. The fire in the painting blazed, consuming the woman, but instead of burning away, it grew brighter, hotter. The room filled with the acrid scent of burning wood, yet the painting remained untouched. The flames roared higher until they suddenly vanished, leaving the room in an oppressive silence. The next night, the woman came for them. Heavy footsteps echoed through the halls, slow and deliberate. Agnes and Edmund sat frozen in their bed as the sound grew closer, the air in the room turning thick with the smell of burning. The door creaked open, and there she stood, the woman from the painting, now fully formed. Her skin was blackened, smoke rising from her charred body, her eyes wide with rage. "This is my house," she rasped, her voice a chilling whisper. The next morning, the house was silent. No one in the village ever saw Agnes and Edmund again. They simply disappeared. To this day, the house stands empty. If you dare to look through the cracked windows, you'll see the painting still hanging above the fireplace, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to enter. The whispers in the village are enough to keep anyone from even thinking about it. If you ever stumble upon an old abandoned house in Ebon Ridge, you might want to think twice before stepping inside.